Okay, so for decades, dietary fat has been painted as, well, the ultimate health villain, hasn't it?
Absolutely. You think about clogged arteries, weight gain. Fat got blamed for pretty much everything.
Yeah, things like butter, cheese, eggs, they were all firmly on the avoid list.
Mm-hmm. And we were told to replace them with low-fat alternatives, diligently.
But what if that whole narrative, that whole fear, was based on maybe a fundamental misunderstanding?
It's a powerful question because that perception was deeply, deeply ingrained in public health advice for a very long time.
Right. Those dietary guidelines.
Yeah, they consistently push for minimizing whole-fat dairy, other fats, mainly because of saturated fat content.
And the assumed link to bad cholesterol, heart disease, even overall mortality.
Exactly. It really shaped how millions of us thought about food and health.
So this feels like a really important shift to unpack. That's our mission for this deep dive, isn't it?
It is. We need to look at how this understanding of dietary fat is evolving.
What's its actual relationship with cardiovascular risk? And where does it genuinely fit in a heart-healthy diet?
And we've got some solid ground to cover this, digging into a major multinational study and insights from cardiology.
Great. So let's just rewind a bit first. Remind ourselves of that core assumption that drove policy for so long.
The basic idea, the one that shaped so much of the 20th century, was pretty simple on the surface.
Saturated fat raises blood cholesterol.
Which then increases cardiovascular risk. Straight line, supposedly.
And that directly led to the huge low-fat diet movement.
Oh, yeah. Ditching butter, full-fat dairy, red meat, even egg yolks.
In favor of what? Grains, fruit juice, margarine?
Lots of margarine, and all those specially engineered light or low-fat processed foods that filled the supermarkets.
It was quite a restrictive way of thinking about food.
It was. But the critical point here, looking back, is that this old view, however well-intentioned, had some pretty significant limitations.
Okay, like what?
Well, for starters, it was mostly based on early observational studies and animal experiments.
Which don't always translate perfectly to humans.
Not always, no. And they really failed to capture the sheer complexity of how our bodies handle lipids, fats.
Ah.
Crucially, that view didn't distinguish between different types of LDL cholesterol particles. Some are worse than others.
Right, it's not just one single bad cholesterol.
Exactly. And it didn't account for saturated fat coming from different sources. Dairy fat might act differently than fat from processed meat, for example.
Okay.
And maybe the biggest oversight, it completely missed the potential harm of replacing dietary fat with refined carbohydrates.
That's a huge piece of the puzzle we often ignored.
It really is. And that's where the picture starts to get, a lot clearer or maybe murkier, depending on how you look at the old advice.
Which brings us neatly to this massive study, the PRE study, Prospective Urban Rural Epidemiology.
Yes, a game changer in many ways.
The scale is just incredible. What was it? Over 130,000 people.
136,384 individuals, to be precise, ages 35 to 70.
From 21 countries across 5 continents.
Yeah.
That's diversity.
Huge diversity. And they followed them for, on average, 9.1 years. So a long-term perspective, too.
That's an immense amount of data to challenge the old ways.
And challenge it did. The findings on dairy were particularly striking.
Okay, let's hear them.
So higher intake of total dairy, defined as more than 2 servings a day compared to none, was actually associated with a lower risk of a composite outcome.
Composite meaning?
Meaning overall mortality or major cardiovascular events combined.
Lower risk with more dairy.
Yes. And it didn't stop there. Also, lower risk of total mortality, non-cardiovascular mortality, cardiovascular mortality, major cardiovascular disease.
Wow.
And notably, a lower risk of stroke.
Stroke, too. That really flies in the face of the old advice.
It absolutely does. Specifically looking at types of dairy, higher intake of milk and yogurt showed this link to lower risk of the composite outcome.
What about cheese and butter? They're often the main culprits people think of.
Interestingly, cheese intake wasn't significantly associated with that main composite outcome in this study.
Okay.
And butter intake was actually quite low across the study population, so it also didn't show a significant association with clinical outcomes one way or the other.
And heart attacks, myocardial infarction.
No significant association observed there either.
So the big takeaway is dairy consumption, particularly milk and yogurt, linked to lower risk of death and major cardiovascular events.
Broadly, yes. That's what this huge data set showed.
It's not just tweaking the advice, is it? It feels like a fundamental rethink.
It really is. It suggests we might have been avoiding foods that could actually be protective. A complete reversal, as you say.
Which makes you wonder why the focus was so heavily, perhaps wrongly, placed on dietary fat's impact on LDL cholesterol.
Well, that's another layer we understand better now. Did you know that about 90% of your baseline LDL cholesterol level is genetically determined?
90%. Really?
Yes. Your liver is the main player here. It regulates cholesterol production through enzymes and genes like HMG-CoA reductase, which statins target, and the PCSK9 gene.
So my body's own production is the main driver, much more than, say, choosing butter or olive oil.
For your baseline level, yes. Your genetic blueprint plays a far bigger role than many people realize. Diet has an influence, of course, but genetics sets the stage.
That implies just chasing a lower LDL number purely through diet might be, well, difficult for many people.
It can be, yes. And it brings us back to the type of LDL.
Ray, you mentioned it's not a monolith.
Exactly. There are different types, primarily different sizes and densities, and the small, dense LDL particles seem to be the more atherogenic ones.
Meaning they're more likely to contribute to plaque buildup in arteries.
Correct. They can more easily penetrate the artery wall. And here's the twist.
Go on.
Diets high in refined carbohydrates, not necessarily fats, seem to be more strongly associated with a shift towards these more harmful, small, dense LDL particles.
Okay, that is a huge piece of information. We demonized fat, but maybe refined carbs were doing more damage to our cholesterol profile in that specific way.
That's certainly what a growing body of evidence suggests. It shifts the focus significantly.
And what about fat as fuel? We often just think storage.
But it's a crucial fuel source, especially for some very important organs.
Like the heart and brain.
Precisely. The heart, muscle, the myocardium loves fatty acids. And the brain is remarkably adaptable.
How so?
When carbohydrates are restricted, the brain can derive up to 75% of its energy needs from ketone bodies.
Which are made from fat.
Made by the liver from fatty acids, yes. This metabolic flexibility is why certain diets can be effective.
Like low-carb, high-fat diets. Ketogenic diets.
Exactly. When they're formulated properly, LCHF diets can lead to significant reductions in triglycerides, increases in the good HDL cholesterol, and improved insulin sensitivity.
And the evidence on heart risk with these diets?
There's no consistent evidence showing they increase cardiovascular risk despite the high fat intake. Often markers improve.
That metabolic flexibility point is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a really striking historical example of this, isn't there? Before insulin was discovered.
Yes, a really powerful one. Before 1921, for people with type 1 diabetes, what used to be called insulin-dependent diabetes, there was no insulin treatment. It was essentially a fatal diagnosis.
But some people survived.
Some survived for years, even decades, thanks to what were called animal diets.
Which were?
Almost exclusively fat and protein. Think meats, eggs, dairy. Very, very few carbohydrates.
So by drastically cutting carbs, they were minimizing the need for insulin they couldn't produce.
Exactly. And they were forcing their bodies to run primarily on fat and ketones for energy. Physicians used this to manage blood glucose.
It shows fat not as a villain, but as a life-sustaining therapeutic tool in that context.
A stark contrast to how it was viewed for much of the later 20th century, absolutely.
So if dietary fat, especially from whole food sources like dairy, isn't the primary enemy we thought, what should we really be focusing on in our modern food environment?
Well, if you look at the evidence and the typical Western diet, the finger points much more strongly towards refined carbohydrates.
Meaning? Give us examples.
Sugars, syrups, white flour, most processed snacks, sugary drinks, white bread, pastries, all those things.
And why are they such a concern?
Because these high glycemic foods get digested really quickly. They cause sharp spikes in blood glucose, which then triggers a big insulin release.
The sugar rush, then the crash.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that crash often leads to more hunger, more cravings, and ultimately overconsumption.
And over time, this cycle leads to
insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, accumulation of visceral fat, the dangerous fat around your organs, and chronic inflammation.
all major drivers of cardiovascular disease.
Key drivers, yes.
And you mentioned earlier these refined carb-heavy diets also worsen the lipid profile, right?
They do. They tend to increase those small, dense LDL particles we talked about, lower the protective HDL cholesterol, and raise triglycerides. That's a much more atherogenic picture.
More artery clogging potential than a diet with moderate whole food fats.
That seems to be the case, yes.
Okay, but what about the calorie argument? Fat has more calories per gram than carbs or protein. Doesn't that automatically mean it's more fattening?
That's a common misconception based purely on calorie density. But food isn't just about calories. It's about how it affects your body, your hormones, your hunger.
So fat might be more satisfying.
Exactly. Diets higher in fat, particularly from whole foods, are often much more satiating.
How does that work?
Fat slows down gastric, emptying how quickly food leaves your stomach. It also triggers the release of satiety hormones like cholecystokinin or CCK.
So you feel fuller for longer, less urge to snack.
Generally, yes. Which often leads people to naturally eat fewer total calories overall, even if the fat content is higher.
Contrast that with?
With many ultra-processed, low-fat foods, they take out the fat, which takes out flavor and texture, so they often compensate by adding sugar, starch, and other additives.
Making them less satiating, maybe even more likely to be overconsumed.
That's frequently the outcome, leading to metabolic dysfunction despite being low-fat.
Even with modern tools, like AI apps that track fat intake.
Right. Things like Dr. Shape might estimate your grams of fat, but they can't really capture the quality of that fat or the context of the whole food or its effect on satiety.
So context is key. Food sources matter.
Immensely. It reinforces the need to look beyond just macronutrient numbers and focus on actual food quality and overall dietary patterns.
Okay, this is incredibly helpful. So for people listening wanting to apply this, what's some practical advice for incorporating healthy fats?
Sure. It's about choosing good sources and finding balance.
Like using certain oils?
Yes. Use olive oil, rapeseed oil for cooking, dressings. Snack on unsalted nuts, seeds, olives instead of, say, crackers or crisps.
Avocados are good too, right?
Definitely. Add avocado to salads, on toast, whatever you like. And here's a key one based on the PRE study insights.
Or vary.
Yes. Don't necessarily fear full-fat yogurt or cheese in moderation, especially if you're choosing them over the sugary, low-fat versions.
That's a big shift for many. What about fish?
Absolutely crucial. Aim for oily fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, herring, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Great source of omega-3 fats.
So the bottom line is focus on quality and balance, not just rigidly counting fat grams.
That's the essence of it. Quality foods, balanced plate.
Okay, so let's try and summarize this deep dive. It feels like we've seen a really profound shift in the science.
Definitely. Dietary fats, especially from whole foods, are not the villains we portrayed them as.
They're vital macronutrients, supporting energy, hormones, brain health, heart health, even potentially helping with weight control through satiety.
Correct. And the real focus, based on current understanding, probably needs to shift more towards avoiding or reducing refined carbohydrates and ultra-processed foods.
And prioritizing whole food sources of all macronutrients, including fats.
It's about embracing a more nuanced, evidence-based view of eating, rather than sticking to outdated, overly simplistic dogma.
Okay, a final thought then, for everyone listening. Considering everything we've unpacked today, the PRE study, the role of genetics, the different types of LDL, the impact of refined carbs, the history. How might understanding this reevaluated role of dietary fat change your personal approach to eating for long-term health?